Hey everyone, this is Cody Schweitzer from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Thank you for joining us today. Excited this is one of our first Google Hangouts on air, so thanks for hanging out with us. So today's chat is about how to build ties with young donors and volunteers. So there are 80 million Americans now in their 20s who've shown tremendous interest in charities and promoting the common good, but many groups struggle to figure out how to attract them to a specific cause. And so we're here today to kind of help you figure out how to attract those young donors and volunteers. And with us are the two authors of Cause for Change, The Why and How of Nonprofit Millennial Engagement, and other nonprofit officials who work regularly with millennials. And so we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. So Derek, if you want to start.
Sure. My name is Derek Feldman. I'm the CEO of Achieve and a co-author with Kerry that you'll meet in a little bit on Cause for Change. And I've been leading Achieve for the last 5 years, and the Millennial Impact Research Project too as well.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm the vice president of an organization called Liberty in North Korea, and we use awareness to redefine or to shift public perception on North Korea away from the politics and onto the people. And we target the Millennial Generation through 3 different ways. The first is through national tours. Every spring and fall, we send what we call nomads across the country to high schools and universities and to screen different media and documentaries that we produce on the North Korea crisis. We also have a worldwide chapter program. We call it a rescue team program, where we have students raising funds and awareness on their campuses. And then lastly, we utilize every fall we do a big online campaign where we push out media and raise funds. And all of the funds we raise go to help rescue North Korean refugees. So that's what we do.
Cool. Hey everybody, this is Kerry Tomski, and I am principal of KDS Strategies, which is a nonprofit consulting firm. Prior to establishing KDS Strategies, I spent about 5 years at the Case Foundation, and it was really at the Case Foundation that I helped them build up their Social Citizens Initiative, which focused on the Millennial Generation and how they're changing the nature of institutions and nonprofits. And that led Derek and I to begin doing some work together around the Millennial Impact Report, which then fast forward led us to writing our book, Cause for Change, which is now out. So thrilled to be a part of this discussion and looking forward to chatting with everyone today. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Kirkpatrick and I work with Building Tomorrow. I'm our resident jack of all trades, and Building Tomorrow works with millennials really all over the world at this point who establish chapters at their colleges and universities that raise funds and awareness to construct primary schools, community primary schools in East Africa. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we do, and looking forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon. My name is Nessa Stopes, and I'm the Youth Engagement Manager at Oxfam America. And Oxfam is a global organization that works to right the wrongs of poverty, hunger, and injustice. And so we work with students, largely college and university students, to raise awareness about global social justice issues and to take action on their campuses and campaign for social change. And we do that through our student leadership program, the Change Initiative, as well as through our Oxfam America Clubs on-campus program.
Hi everybody, my name is Nicole Pfeiffer Hicks. I am the National Director for Student Programs for the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life. The American Cancer Society works to eliminate cancer as a major health issue, and my focus is specifically on the youth component, elementary through college engagement in Relay Through Life, focusing on fundraising, leadership, and cancer education.
Great, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us. So before we get started, I just want to say, anyone watching, if you're watching on the philanthropy.com article page, you can leave a question in the comments at the bottom of that page. If you're watching on Google+, you can leave a comment on the Hangout in Google+. And so to get started here, Derek, do you want to start us off talking a little bit about the book and your research?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, for the last 3 years, we have been focusing on millennial engagement research, the Millennial Impact Report, which has been supported by the Case Foundation and their efforts, where Kerry was too as well, and then currently now. Over the last 4 years, we have, I would say, become much closer to understanding how millennials, what we say, involve, connect, and then give causes. And obviously there are some outliers in the whole stories of millennials, and we see some that bypass certain engagement strands to then become givers and donors and so forth. But fundamentally, we are seeing 3 core things that are happening that we discuss in the book. One is that millennials are taking what we call micro actions that lead up to larger strands of engagement. We see that millennials are taking and liking and participating in social networks and supporting their friends and followers in efforts to not only spread awareness, build advocacy, sign petitions, that kind of participation. And then we also see those micro actions leading into self-organized groups where they come together with their friends to teach, to advocate, to help others understand the importance of the cause. And then after that, we see it continue to build with leaders taking on roles where they will then participate in organizing activism, organizing other students and millennials and leaders on their behalf. And so, as I mentioned, we see this micro leading into larger strands of engagement. And one of the core things that we discuss in the book is that organizations need to have all opportunities at each one of those, from micro to larger strands. And I know that some of the organizations here have done very successful campaigns, as well as advocacy and knowledge-building campaigns where they've used millennials to start in sort of smaller levels of engagement and then building up. The second core thing that we talk about is the use of peer. In all of our research over the last 4 years, we continue to see that the peer engagement is very, very strong with the generation. It is very strong when it comes to the consumer side, and it's also very strong when it comes to nonprofit activism and engagement too. And we see that peer small group, the 3 to 5 individuals, sometimes even more, they start to connect and work together. And then as they continue to work together and the organization responds to them, we'll see that they'll take, again, heightened stages of involvement over the course of time. And so the best thing that we can see is that as we try to create millennial engagement is not only for the individual to act on themselves, but also to help and create the mechanisms for them to bring their close friends together and then build it from there. And then the last core thing that we see with the book that we talk about is this notion of tangible transparency. You know, we are now at a point where we can communicate in so many different mediums, and we are at a point now that we have to help millennials understand that your action equates to something, that it moves the needle on something and gets to an end outcome. And that our focus should not necessarily be on always our organization, but how the organization is the conduit to the end, the means to the end, and how their action, their participation, their bringing their friends around together can help them really affect the cause and the issue. So those are 3 of the primary pieces, and I'm sure Kerry can talk about one of the things that we discuss in the book, which is the Millennial Engagement Platform. So Kerry, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. And for some reason I'm not showing up on the screen. I don't know why that is, but can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. So first of all, I think it's important for us to talk a little bit. You know, we didn't do any level setting at the beginning of this. One of the things that we like to make sure we share with folks when we first start talking about millennials is that we're talking about those roughly between the ages of 20 to 35 today, are those born between 79 and 93. You know, millennials kind of came of age at the turn of the millennium. Or we, and you know, Derek and I are quick to note that we are millennials. We're cuspers. We're on the upper end, right there on the cusp between Gen X and Gen Y. But you know, millennials kind of came of age at the turn of the millennium. If you look at the first 10 years of this, you know, of this century, there was tremendous technological change and economical change and social change, and all of this was happening at a time that millennials were also coming of age. And those of us on the older end of the spectrum have now spent about 10 years in this space and in the workforce, and we have seen a tremendous amount. And one of the what we talk about in the book is really something that we have structured as the build platform. And the way that we talk about engagement among millennials is, we have to have an acronym for everything. So the B is be unified. Be unified as an organization about how to work with this generation. It starts by getting every level of your organization interested in what the generation can provide. And a lot of people kind of very quickly gravitate to financial opportunities, but that's not necessarily the right framework to lead with. Engaging millennials is a long-term investment, and anybody thinks that it's anybody who thinks that it's kind of this surefire way to raise a lot of money in a quick amount of time, that's actually not what the millennial generation is going to give to you. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on. The U in build stands for understanding the complexities of this generation's environment. Appreciating the environment that the generation is currently in and the one in which they've grown up in. One that's incredibly socially connected, and one that is incredibly diverse. And I think that one of the things that this generation is recognizing is that we are no longer just citizens within our community, but we see ourselves as global citizens. And I think that many of the organizations that are represented on this call today are going to talk to that. The I is identify those seeking to make a difference. We know that there are 80 million millennials out there. We're not saying that every one of them is going to be excited and passionate about your cause, but it's important to identify those leaders, those peer influencers who then can build and help bring their friends into the fold, which is kind of what Derek was alluding to a little bit more or a little bit earlier. And then the L is lead through engagement rather than participation. Focus on conversational relationship engagement. That's the way that you engage with millennials is incredibly important. And then finally, determine your own millennial success. Before you even begin engaging with them, try to put some metrics behind, create a standard for what success looks like in engaging with millennials, and then institutionalize it. Get your organization to really understand what this investment means and why the investment today is a longer-term opportunity for your organization. When you look at this generation, I think it's important to note that there's a $41 trillion transfer of wealth that's going to be taking place from the baby boomer and greatest generation down to their Gen X and Gen Y kids. And so while we may you may be competing for our very limited dollars, our very limited attention spans today, this is a much longer term investment that everybody needs to be paying attention to. So so that's a very small snapshot of the build platform that we speak about. But I think right now what would be really exciting is for us to kind of open it up and have a broader conversation here.
Great, thank you both. Just kind of want to start the conversation off. Let's start with Justin. If you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with millennials and what you found to be effective so far.
Sure. I definitely agree. Engage with millennials as opposed to start with participation. One of our probably more successful programs that we're currently running is our national tour program, and these are tours that are really run off of volunteers, millennials who come into our office and work 40+ hours a week, and they cold call and we call upwards of 5,000 venues in a 10-week time span, and then we send them on the road, and they travel all of North America. into 6 different provinces in Canada. And we've seen, since 2009, we've had over 100 millennials of the college age come in and volunteer 40+ hours a week. And we've also seen, over $1 million raised through high engagement on campuses. And so we go to campuses and we host an event, a screening of a documentary, but the goal is to have more of a long-term presence. And so we equip students with resources to start what we call rescue teams, but more commonly known as chapters. And we try to build that relationship from our office so that we're not just a one-stop shop. We don't just stop it on your campus and present, but we actually have a team that will stay behind and work with the students in the local area to engage and to get them involved. And usually that starts off with just awareness, with resources to spread awareness on campus, to reach out to peers. And probably 6 months to a year later is when actual fundraising would begin, if the students are interested in fundraising. But we've seen that model effective, going to someone's campus, having conversation. The presenters look like the individuals that are on that campus. They're of the same age. And then they follow up with students who are interested. And I believe in what Seth Godin talks about. He's like, you don't need everyone to care about your cause, just the people who are interested, or the people who who show interest. And so we target the people who show interest, and we go after them.
And so really with this, to go back to one of Derek and Kerry's points, you're kind of working to build key change makers on each of these campuses?
Right.
Great. Great. And Maggie, if you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what you found to be effective?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit more background about Building Tomorrow. We, as I mentioned, just like I think most of the groups represented here, Building Tomorrow works with college chapters throughout the U.S., and then we have a new international chapter that's just gotten on board. And our student supporters raise the money to fund the construction, really construction materials of a new school in East Africa. And then we take the money that they've raised and we issue a challenge grant to partner communities where we say, we'll fund construction materials and skilled labor if you donate the land and volunteer your time to build a school. And that's Building Tomorrow's model really in general. There's a lot of little bits and pieces of the puzzle there. But that's the pitch that we make to students. We need you to motivate your campus behind this idea that you guys can do a lot to empower another community to provide an education for their children. And what we've seen, what's been most successful for us is really that peer-to-peer networking and peer-to-peer communication about getting involved. Our chapter program has grown really organically. We've invested, to this point, almost nothing in terms of resources to try and recruit new students and get in front of new students. And we've really just relied on it, and we've been lucky. One student who's founded a chapter, and then some of their friends have attended an event, and then they've gone to another school and they've started a chapter there. And slowly but surely that network has grown. And at this point, I think compared to a number of the groups that are represented here, we have a relatively small number of chapters, but the impact that they're providing is pretty huge. We've got around 28 colleges and universities, again, in the US and UK that we work with right now. And some of our chapters are raising annually $20,000 or $30,000 from single events. And that's where we're seeing just a lot of success. One person plans this really huge event, gets everyone behind. It's again, you work with specific students and you don't try and work with everyone. And we've been fortunate, again, that those folks have come to us. But they do really high impact, high value fundraising, and just kind of make their events their own. We have a couple of really specific campaigns that we give them as tools, but our goal as an office is just to say, hey, here's different things that you can do, but here's the bottom line, and what we need you to do is raise the money and get your campus behind the idea that there's a lot that we can and should do to bridge this global education gap. And then we really let them take it and make what they want out of it. And it's been really successful. It's not always successful because you do have to have a really motivated student. But for us, the peer-to-peer, sharing that with your students, getting millennials on board just by the fact that they've been involved with something very similar, that's most successful for us.
Great. And Nessa, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. So the main way that we engage this group is through the Change Initiative, which is our student leadership program. And it happens annually every summer. We bring about 50 students to Boston and we train them on Oxfam America campaigns, but how to also connect with others once they go back to their home campuses and communities and take action. How do they engage other students? And how do they identify their own leadership style and work with others on campus, students as well as administration. And we're actually recruiting for this right now. So if you know undergraduate students who might be interested in participating, they can apply on our website through April 1st. And then we also have, like many others, have the Oxfam America clubs, and that's for students who learn about Oxfam, our campaigns, and want to support our work. So students, again, we have specific campaigns that we share information and materials and resources on. One of the big ones right now is our GROW campaign, and it's around food, justice, and the planet, and how is there going to be enough food to feed every man, woman, and child on our planet by 2050. So the students work with Oxfam, and they're taking, at times legislative actions, at times corporate actions to raise awareness and engage others. They might also organize an Oxfam America hunger banquet or volunteer with us at a concert. So they have access to staff and materials. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we've learned in working with this group. So they have a ton of creativity and technology prowess. So let them use that, and give them the information and make sure they're supported and on track. But let them develop the campaign or the action that is personal and meaningful to them, and that they think students on their campus are going to get excited about and take action on. Provide feedback and mentoring. So sometimes, people think that this group is not willing to hear it or interested in our feedback, but they are. And if you provide that follow-up and that feedback and a chance for a dialogue and mentoring where they're learning from you and you're learning from them, I think there's a lot of value in that. And then another lesson is keep them engaged or they will move on. There is a lot of other, there's a lot of other issues, there's a lot of other, priorities, things going on that their friends are introducing them to. And so if you don't keep them engaged, someone else is likely to snap them up. And just to share a conversation that I had with one of our student leaders yesterday. She was talking, she participated in our training last summer in Boston, and then she's been back on her campus organizing at Virginia Tech this year. And she was talking about the week of the training she attended with Oxfam. And she said, the training was as much about the people that I got to know and meet during that week as it was about the issues. She said, I met 49 other student leaders who were just as excited about fighting hunger, poverty, and social injustice as I was. So she cared about the issues, and then she made that connection with her peers who are working with her all across this country this year on those issues. So again, that peer connection and getting, making those connections and then using that to get, your friends and family and community and administration involved as well.
Great, thanks. So, Kerry, I saw you nodding along to a few parts there. Is there anything you'd like to point out there?
So one of the things that just really rang true, and certainly what we saw as we were researching for the book and through the research in the Millennial Impact Report, is that, millennials today are incredibly connected to issues. They care about issues. They're not going to be as passionate about joining an institution or an organization. It's, the question becomes, what is that organization doing? And I'm not going to just like them to like them. I'm going to like them because they're providing, clean water to a village in, in Nairobi. They're going to like them because they know the very tangible impact of what their investment makes. And so, I see organizations really struggling right now, particularly membership organizations, who are not, who are not attracting this generation in the same way, because they're not pulling at their heartstrings in the same way, and because this generation is just so driven by issues, education, poverty, whatever it might be, and that's what they go after. They don't look as much at what the institution is. And I'm curious if people, on their phone who are representing various organizations are seeing some of that. I think that what each of your organizations does is you do a very good job at really making those very deliberate connections. And so I think that's why you are having success with the millennial generation.
So, Nicole, on that point, kind of how are you making those connections, and what are you doing that's working?
I think the way our organization is structured has helped set us up for a lot of our volunteers coming into campus have some knowledge of who we are as an organization. They've likely participated, and they have that personal connection to this health issue. So we've seen a lot of benefits to engaging them at a younger age. And then when they come onto campus and beyond, they continue to keep that tie. But I think we also do a lot of what everyone else has said, which is we have campus chapters and committees, and it's not a simple commitment. We found that they enjoy a challenge. They enjoy taking on more than what you might think they would want to, and they often gladly do it. There's that fine balance between, be as a staff, if I'm in the field and I'm their staff partner, giving them support and, giving them too much support. So we've had to work hard to kind of refine what that looks like. But what we really try to look at is that holistic picture. It's fundraising is obviously a component for us, but what else can we offer them? What do our opportunities give them to help them grow as people and look at character development and learning about giving back to their community? And then what's the benefit for them internally beyond that? Like that kind of nice satisfaction of knowing that you can make a difference. I think that's been really successful for us, is the opportunity for people to take on that leadership role and have something tangible that they can wrap their arms around.
Great, thanks. I want to talk a second about this idea of giving them support but not too much support. It seems like one of the trends that I saw, and everyone talking about what's been successful so far, is kind of giving the group the opportunity to kind of do things on their own. Derek, can you talk to that a little bit? Kind of this idea?
Yeah, we have seen organizations be successful when we can sort of say, these are the goalposts. This is what we hope the end solution is to here. Now, you guys can create the playing field and what that will be, and you help guide them, and that could be done through education and leadership, as well as different types of programs, intergenerational as well. And each time that we've seen participation spike, at least in some continue to offer sort of the creative platform for people to own the issue, and then develop that issue and reach out to their friends to get them involved in that issue in the creative way that they do, just like Nicole was saying. And I think if organizations are successful, it's not saying we have a predefined, you got to do this exactly like this, but offer that ability for them to say, how can I innovate within your organization to help the issue? How can I create new ideas and new programs? And you as an organization listen, respond, and if they work, it could be scaled and could be brought to other types of things. And I think that sort of grassrootsness has definitely helped some millennials attract other millennials, and especially when you get to some of the campus types programs.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I mean, I would say one thing I would add, I guess, for our student groups, I really agree with what Derek said. In a sense, making sure, like the investment, I would say the investment we make is on making sure that they understand the vision behind the organization and why these student groups exist and the role that they play. And so every year we will relaunch kind of or re-educate our student groups on, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish in 2013, but this is our vision as an organization. This is the absolute end goal, but here's the micro goal this year, 2013, that your group can be a part of impacting. And so I think constantly, reminding or engaging with these student groups is important so that they see the bigger picture and they don't lose sight of how important that bake sale is on campus, or that benefit concert, or whatever the methodology is that they do use to raise funding, that they don't lose sight of how important that grassroots activism is.
And I would add to that that even giving or giving the students obviously the flexibility to make different events their own is really important, but in our experience we've seen that definitely does not mean that you're not still having day-to-day conversations and really direct engagement and communication with the students. We've found, if we try and offer, hey, this is exactly what you can do, X, Y, and Z, some students will like that. A lot will say, actually, hey, I want to do this, but I still want to talk to you every day and I need your help walking through it. And we've, been told really regularly, we have a very small team. There's only a handful of us in the office, but our students have told us pretty consistently that one of the reasons they keep coming back and they stay involved in the work that we do is because of how easy it is to even just communicate with our team. And like you were saying, if they have a question and they want to get up to date on what we're doing and why we're doing it, they can jump on the phone and call the guy who founded the organization and just ask. They can jump online and send me an email or another team member an email and get that information pretty much directly from the source. There's not a lot of layers, there's not a lot of bureaucracy. You can just have a really open and honest conversation. And for us, I think that's one of the biggest things that we can bring to the table, and one of the biggest benefits of being somewhat small is those levels of communication are really, really open.
And Code, I would echo that. And one of the key pieces that we talk about in the book is this concept about leadership inviting, in which that the leadership makes themselves available even to millennials and to their constituents. And it's interesting, it's even if the constituent never calls or emails, it's that feeling of knowing they're going to listen and be supportive when necessary. And that's kind of exactly to your point.
All right, we have our first question that came in from the audience, and I want to remind everyone who's watching, if you are watching on philanthropy.com, you can post your question in the comments there at the bottom of the page, or if you're watching on Google+, you can post it as a comment on the Hangout. So the first question is, how risk-averse or tolerant are millennials? Would like to hear from Justin on Link's experience with whether/how millennials risk self and assets toward a greater good. That's from Howard Freeman. So Justin, you want to take that one first?
Sure. So obviously I guess I would say in my experience in working with the millennials, I would say that the millennials are very risk averse. And I have seen so much sacrifice, and it may not be on the same scale, right, as some of your larger capacity donors. But what millennials sacrifice to whether contribute financially or their time, I think that what millennials have above any other demographic is time. They're willing to commit time to your cause if you have a good reason for them to commit. And they will sacrifice their weekends, or they will take a semester off school in some cases if the vision of the organization and if what you have to offer is compelling, and they know that their time commitment or their donation is actually going to make a difference. So communicating that is important. And so I would say communicating what the donation or what the time investment is going to accomplish for your organization is important. And if you can do that well, they will sacrifice.
Great. What do other people think? Have you seen that millennials are risk averse or risk tolerant?
In our experience, I feel like they are willing to take risks and put themselves out there, and they want our support in doing that. So it is about those check-ins and those conversations with the staff member who can say, is your time and investment with, this person or this event going to be worth it and pan out for you? So I think they're willing to take risks, and they're looking for that guidance and that support from us as organizations.
I agree with that, and I would go even further to say that our staff have to be willing and able to ask the questions, like Nessa said, to get them there. Like, so that you've got this grand idea, how do we support getting it to a manageable level, but not squashing the idea? And so we need to be able to ask the right questions to help them get to an end goal that meets where we both want to be.
And I would add, on top of the risk aversion piece, when the question was first posed, I thought about it a little bit differently. I mean, definitely a lot of students and millennials these days are really excited to volunteer their time, and they're incredibly generous with anything that they do have. But the risk piece that I found really interesting has more directly to do with your end product, what your program or what your organization does. And what I mean by that, in our experience, a lot of the students that get involved in Building Tomorrow's work are really interested in education, global development issues, social entrepreneurship, all those key words. And it just so happens, because of where they are in their lives, many of them are taking classes on a lot of these subjects. And really regularly we're hearing from students, well, we learned about this, or I studied these organizations and this is happening, or does your organization do this, or why? Like, they're learning about best practices, and they want to be confident that they're investing their time and energy in an organization that's meeting the best practices that they're being told. I'm not sure if I'm articulating it very well. It's a difficult thing to say, but one of the things that I think we then are responsible for is just, again, being really open and honest about what it is we're doing and how we're doing it, but how it doesn't always work perfectly, and how we have them on, we recruit them using simple taglines and simple calls to action that we all know from experience aren't always quite so simple on the implementation side. And just having really honest conversations with students about, we know you're learning about that, and hey, that's a really interesting thing. This is what we're doing to address that. Or here's how this piece works, on the ground, in the field, and here's how we're addressing some of those points. I don't know, I've just seen more risk aversion to that type of thing, just related to where they are and what they're studying, and to a point, maybe just the idealistic nature of millennials, and just having to be honest that it's not always perfect and it doesn't always work and there are challenges, but that's a good thing. And educating them on the whole process of this kind of work in general. Does that make sense? I don't know. Those are the types of things happening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kerry and Derek, what do you think? I mean, this kind of gets back to the idea of that tangible transparency, right?
From our own clients and things that we have worked with to other organizations that we've looked at in research, we continue to see that millennials want to take risk, and it's not necessarily that looking at positions or things in which that they can become leaders needs to have a clear set of things that they get back. And I often look at this as from even looking at jobs and some of the volunteer projects, even the things that are happening at Link as well, is that some of these people who get trained and they're going around, you never really know the experience you're probably going to have until you get into it, and the great benefit that comes back both to you personally as well as to the organization. And that happens a lot with those that sign up for Teach for America or some of the other types of core programs, where we see that it was really, really great, and they're taking a risk rather than necessarily going into a job that might provide better benefits and salaries and those kinds of things. And so whether you're a volunteer, whether you're taking, whether you're going at it a different way, I think that the generation has been very, they're looking at risk and saying, I care about the issue and I care about the cause. Therefore, there are some other things that, I don't mind if I let go. I don't know, Kerry, you?
No, I mean, I would agree with what's been said. I also think that, you know, we've touched a bit on how you know, being a social entrepreneur is something that is very, you know, that just kind of resonate. Everybody wants to be a social entrepreneur as a millennial. They want to go after these, you know, solving these big problems. And so I think that, you know, I think that it's been really interesting to hear from the organizations and hear where, you know, the necessity of, yes, well, I'll start by saying, you know, I think that what's really important is how do you get these social entrepreneurs, these young people with the big ideas, bridging more closely with the institutions and organizations that have the systems in place, have structures for feedback. You know, I think several of you have mentioned the importance of providing that feedback. And I think we need to do a better job in making those connections between the two, because we have a enthusiastic, energetic group of young people who are coming at social problems in a big way, but they also, you know, need to recognize that there are people and organizations that have been at it for a long time. And so I think the more strategic we can get as organizations in bringing those young people in, giving them opportunities to lead and to share ideas and to collaborate with teams, the better off you know, we can be in the long run.
Great. So, kind of to shift, you know, a lot of times one of the things that we can learn just as much from, other than what's been successful, is what hasn't been successful. Don't know if anyone wants to share something that they've tried with millennials that hasn't worked as well as expected, that that you could maybe let other organizations know about.
I guess I'll go. So I think something for us, and this has actually been interesting, and it seems like the pendulum is kind of has every year it kind of shifts in an opposite direction, especially when we're going to brand or launch a campaign. Something that I have found is that the millennial generation does not respond well to guilt, and not like guilting people into donating or participating. But just when your message, when you're talking, a lot of us are involved with very heavy topics, and when the message of our topic is guilt-driven, or kind of, you know, it shows, for example, our message is, what we like to focus on is that the North Korean people are incredibly resilient in the midst of extreme challenges. And so when we promote campaigns, when we push out videos, we want to make sure that we capture the resilience of the North Korean people in spite of these challenges, and not just focus on the challenges the North Korean people are facing. And when we've done that, we've seen a greater response, but there have been times when we've tried to focus more on the tragic things that are happening in North Korea, outside of North Korea, and the response to that isn't as great. And so I think that your message there has to be elements of hope and resilience, so that you can engage and connect. And also, if you're launching a campaign or something, try to even figure out ways, connecting points, you can connect the millennial generation or the audience to an individual story. And you know, it helps when that individual or the client that you're helping is of that same age demographic, because there can be angles that you can take to connect the audience. And so sometimes we've completely missed out on that opportunity where we're targeting a millennial generation, or we're targeting a college-age demographic, and we're talking about a 70-year-old client that we've helped. There are some disconnections there, and so trying to make I think that connection is important, and you'll see a better return. And we've learned the hard way on some campaigns that we've run, and haven't spent enough time really thinking through the campaigns or the branding of the campaign.
I think we've had to challenge ourselves, and you know, this is I'm sure it won't come as a big surprise, to be sure to communicate in a number of different ways. So, you know, 10 years ago, it was email and it was a landline phone. And I have students who contact me by Skype and Facebook and text and phone and email and, you know, tweets and a number of different venues. So we also need to be thinking about how are we connecting with the millennials, and each person still kind of tends to have their, you know, favorite one or two methods of communication. So reaching out, thinking, when we're getting a message out or we need a response from this group, how are we putting the message out there and making sure that we're providing a number of ways for them to access us, but also share our messages with their friends, how they communicate with, between among their peers.
I would agree with that too. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. Go ahead. I'll go next.
One of the things that that we found too is you need to know all of those methods of communication and work in the way that fits with them, but there also has to be that personal connection, and it sometimes it gets lost, and it's extremely important. We can't forget that it can't be just about this great marketing campaign or this really great email and social media campaign. There has to be that human connection as well, and it's really important to make sure that that's tied in. Like, it's a really holistic approach in communication.
And on the topic of communication as well, I would say in our experience, one of the biggest challenges has been challenge has also been a positive thing, but the way and the speed at which information is shared and the number of levels in which it's shared. So just the number of people that a message travels through. Very often we've seen, our marketing ends up being kind of like a giant game of telephone, where we tell, our chapter leader, the student is involved at the top level. We're in regular communication with them, and we'll share something with them about what our messaging is. But then knowing if that's not really, really simple and really direct, when they pass on that message, whether it's online, in person, at a meeting, on a flyer, it might vary slightly. And when that message is shared again, we want it to be shared in this way, and it's exciting that it's shared, but just being really aware of the slight variations and what that can mean in terms of the changes in your message when it gets to the broadest, widest level, if that makes sense. I think a game of telephone is the only way I can think about it, just in terms of how things vary. So for us, just taking a step back and realizing, okay, we need to be really, really simple and really straightforward about what our messaging is, what we're asking a student to do, and what we're asking them to share, because it could change so easily and so quickly just by nature of how we share information these days.
Great. We have another question coming in from the audience. This is from Michael Ann Gardner. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, Michael Ann. She'd like to know how engaging students in their early 20s is different from engaging young professionals in their late 20s or early 30s. How that's different. Derek or Kerry, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll jump in on this one. So when we're thinking about the millennial generation, you have to recognize there are 80 million millennials we're talking about, and the difference between a 20-year-old and a 35-year-old is quite different. 20-year-old may still be in college, probably has very different life experiences. Those of us on the older end of the spectrum, are starting to hopefully settle down, and obviously we know that millennials are settling down, getting married later in life, and having some of those those life changes later on. But I think that when you're speaking, many people are quick to group all 80 million into one nice little box, and I think that's very difficult. It's a challenge because. And we've seen that those who can kind of break down in your communication, the way that you speak with millennials, the way that you interact with them is very different when you're younger. First of all, you may have you have probably less dollars to give when you're on the younger end of the spectrum. You may have different, you're looking for a job, you're doing things that are important at that time in your life, you're not as connected to community. You're, we're seeing that the younger folks are spending time in a variety of different places. You may go to school in one place. Many are going back home after school, and then hopping around from place to place, job to job. And so the connection to community is very different as well, and that, therefore, your experience and your connection in how you're giving and interacting philanthropically is very different. Once you're on the older end of the spectrum, you might be married, you're starting to have children, you start to re-engage, you start to settle down, you start to find that community, and and therefore your giving habits and the way that you volunteer and you spend your time tends to be different. You may have more limited time on this. You may now be making more money, but now you have, when you are engaging, you may be engaged with your children's, your children's school or through their activities. So it is very different. I think that there's a very wide range, and certainly the mechanisms for communicating with the generation as a whole changes based on kind of where folks are. I think the technology is also something that changes, and perhaps there are folks that can speak better to this than I can. But even if you look at the way in which those on the younger end of the spectrum are using technology, we're seeing Facebook is actually something that folks in the mid-20s, mid to upper 20s and 30s are using in larger number than those on the younger end of the spectrum, who are very much connected via text and mobile, who are using platforms like Instagram, which I view as a nice nice way to share pictures of my dog and my daughter and those fun filters. But they're actually using them to have full streams of communications on the younger end. So so I think that it's very important to think about this as this is the largest generation in our country's history, and there are different ways that we need to be interacting with them. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Something, if I can add as well, I think too, like if you're targeting, like the college-age demographic, and then the college grad to young professional, I think your events look quite different as well. I mean, what I've experienced when we engage with the young professionals, they want more network opportunities. Whereas when you're on a campus, it's purely about that fundraiser or that awareness event. Young professionals, if you can provide opportunities for networking, so if you have maybe higher capacity donors who own their own companies, and you can bring in young professionals to attend those events and maybe meet these individuals, I think that's a good way to engage them as well, because you can provide the young professional with something that maybe they want. And so we've seen that, and this is an area where I would say we are currently brainstorming how to better engage with the young professionals and how to get them involved in participation or to give back financially. But what we have seen in various cities across the country, when we're able to host networking meetings or events, those have been quite successful.
And we work with a hospital foundation, and that hospital foundation initially created a young professional type program, similar to what Justin was talking about. And in that program, high-level networking, these were young professionals who were very interested in business type of relationships, and also, I would say, more interested in the leadership aspects of the organization that might exist, from committee levels to advisory boards, eventually on the track to potential leadership within the organization. And as we started to work with that, they were struggling in the conversations with us because they had cohorts of groups that were still just out of college that were interested in more social connectivity, peer, small group awareness, and just smaller education. And yet the only offering that they had, really was for larger types of intensive this networking and education, and we started to see the group really splinter themselves. And as they started to organize events and activities, when the events were happening, they could definitely see that one sort of group of this generation would gravitate towards that social peer engagement piece, versus the other ones who were more on that young professional leadership track were interested in the others. And we actually helped them define 2 stages of involvement as a millennial, which is, and if you want to go to that leadership immediately, that exists for you if that's something you want to do. And they also had the peer piece to ensure that they had both levels and audiences.
Yeah, one thing we've noticed with our, our students versus our alumni or our young professionals is the, kind of their surrounding in which they're organizing. So students are still on campus and have access to campus resources, large groups of students, administration, professors, and they're very willing to work together in that campus environment and sometimes to come to us. Whereas, the millennial professional is, settling down into their community. They want to continue to be involved with us, but more when we're able to go to their community or organize a meetup in and around the city where they're living, and where they can, kind of make those contributions where they are, currently in a place where they have a little bit more money but a little less time, and they've maybe made a few choices about and kind of whittled down the organizations that they're giving their time and their resources to.
Great. So it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. So real quick to wrap up. So if an organization really hasn't worked with millennials, really focused on millennials yet, in a sentence or two, where should they start? What should be one of the first things they do? Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll go back to the first statement that Derek shared, which is to be unified. I think organizationally, all components, everybody needs to be brought in, because it needs to go across all levels, and people really need to have an understanding that this age group, while we might not traditionally think about them as being leaders, at this age they are, and it's not just our future as organizations, it's what's happening to us now and how we can utilize their talents to help us all grow.
Great. Nessa, your thoughts?
Sure. So certainly don't write this generation off. They have a lot to offer, and start that dialogue with a group of millennials. They may already be working in your organization or interning or volunteering, so start that relationship and build it.
Great. Maggie?
Yeah, I would build off what Nessa said and just have those conversations. Most likely there's at least one or two folks who are already involved in your group who are of the millennial generation, and find out what it is that connects them to your cause, because that's a conversation we've been having a lot in our office. What is that personal connection? Especially, we work internationally, and we can't bring a person to come and see firsthand what it is that we do. So it's really important for us to find out what draws in the millennials, what is that personal connection. And I would start there, because if you can replicate that, it will be so much easier.
Great. Kerry?
So I'd say it's very much about being open. It's being open, having your organization open to new approaches, and open to also, opening yourselves up to this generation. They want to know how their dollars are being spent, what the impact of their time and energy is, and so it's opening up in that way. But the final thing I would say is we haven't talked about mentoring, and I think one thing that we're certainly seeing is that traditionally you think of mentoring from executive to to a younger staff member or a volunteer. But what we talk a bit about in the book is the fact that mentoring can go both ways, and there's reverse mentoring. Learn from this generation. Be open to learning and to having them share their skills, their different ways of approaching problem solving, and be open to that, because I think that the generation has a tremendous amount to offer. But it takes openness kind of from all levels in order to bring out the best.
Great. And Justin?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One, invest in good media, from websites to videos to how to connect people on mobile devices. It's an investment, but make that investment. Websites are huge. They're important. It's how millennials learn about our organization. Two, and some of you have said this, hire millennials. And give them decision-making abilities, especially in the creative space. Allow them to be creative. Allow them to make decisions that doesn't have to be signed off by the CEO. They need that authority and I think that creative vision. And so hiring individuals who understand this generation and who can speak to them on the same language. One thing I would caveat that with is sometimes you can fake it, and I think the millennial generation is very good at discovering phonies, people who are trying to speak their language but aren't really among that same demographic. And so make the investment, hire the right people, make sure your media is good, it looks good, it's slick. Those are some of the things I guess I would say.
And Derek?
I think the first thing I would do is take sort of a note from what we've learned when social media started to sort of take off in general, and then how nonprofits used it. Some organizations dived right in, and then they created a Facebook page without understanding really environments and how that works, and therefore got really disappointed with social media because they didn't see the outcome that they really wanted. And we see that happening with millennial engagement, where it just takes a little bit to learn from the organizations here, from research that we've done and other events like MCon and others, the book. I mean, there's other things out there. Just take a minute first and educate and learn from the organizations here, then get started and test and continue to test and experiment with usage of mobile, creating great usability, and things like that. And so I think if we can take sort of this sort of onboarding and on-ramp to be successful in that, I would recommend that first.
Great. Great, so it looks like our time is up. Thanks everyone on the panel today for joining us, and thanks for everyone who tuned in to watch. If you enjoyed this live program, we also offer weekly live discussions, text-based chats at philanthropy.com/live, and a webinar series at philanthropy.com/webinars. So thanks again everyone for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you.
Take care everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.